Civil Liberties, Your Freedoms, Your Rights and Yours to Lose. Delighted to bring Barrister Sunny Virk to the floor. Sunny Virk was selected as the parliamentary candidate for Tamworth. I will hand over to him without further ado. Thank you, Sunny.
Thank you. How does that thing work? Next and back, yeah? Okay. Hello, everybody. So, Civil Liberties, your freedoms, your rights, and yours to lose. So, when I was drafting this talk, two questions came to mind. And I thought, I'm not going to try and answer these. I thought I'd let conference answer these instead. The first question that came to mind is, are your civil liberties are they there to lose, or are they already lost? And the second thing was, are you living under the foot of an authoritarian regime? So two things when you think of civil liberties, these things come to my mind. So they are ancient rights and freedoms. They are a founding pillar, one of the founding pillars of democracy. So essentially, if you're not free, you can't cast a free vote. Politics is the science of governing society, the unwritten rules, the shifting sands of how society controls itself, what's right and what's wrong. It changes from time to time, along with norms and values. And the Liberal Democrats, their basic position is we want to live in peace and harmony, equality for all. In the United Kingdom, we have a liberal democracy, as opposed to just a democracy, and what that means to me is, and generally as well, that the rights of minorities are protected. And democracy, of course, the modern voting system, is the way we choose who we have as responsible to govern. So part of that, in my mind, regardless of the fact that we're in a party system, is we should have the right to choose who is going to be Prime Minister, who is going to be leader. You can all see where this is going. Right. So, next slide 3. The law. The law is one of those tools which is used to govern society. It's meant to be there to protect minorities and ensure civility and freedom, especially in a liberal democracy. The right to protest and demonstrate, that to me is the mortar which sort of sets that foundation. And the right to freedom of assembly is a fundamental right. It's critical to ensure that we have a healthy and vibrant democracy. Where is that right to assembly, the right to protest essentially, where is that enshrined? It's enshrined, we don't have a constitution, a written constitution in the UK, but that's enshrined in the Human Rights Act 1998. Now some of this may be history, it's not now, but there we are. Everyone has, and this is Article 11, this is under Schedule 1, everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and freedom of association with others, including the right to form and join trade unions and for the protection of his interests. Paragraph 2 of that says, there are no restrictions shall be placed on the exercise of these rights as such, other than such prescribed by law and necessary in a democratic society. So what they're talking about there is in security, stopping you damaging property, that sort of stuff. So all of this was already inbuilt into the 1998 Human Rights Act. So the question that I sort of came to mind is, why did this need to change? Why are these important? It's important because it gives people a voice when they protest. Through protest, you know you're not alone. Through protest, you can start to change an agenda or start a debate. It gives voices to the minority groups. And the Tory regime, and it is a regime in my mind, would be subject to checks and balances. So what are the signs of a regime? This is generally speaking. Well, firstly, they want to shift boundaries to keep power. They want to manipulate seats. They allow certain groups to vote whilst prohibiting others. They persecute minorities for existing or persecute their way of life. They want to silence protests, and they want to take away the right to have any sort of legal challenge. Unelected leaders is the last thing that should be on the slide. So taking each one of those 6 points in turn, perfect, They shift boundaries to keep power and keep streets. Now, I'm standing in Tamworth, and there's talk about putting Street A in Whittington into the Tamworth constituency to shore up the Conservative vote. Why? Because I say they're worried. They're worried that the Lib-Dems, if there is a by-election, they're going to win. Even if there's a general election, they're worried we're going to win. The Tory regime know the people of Tamworth will probably be voting Lib-Dem, so they want to do whatever they can with the boundaries. The second criteria, they allow certain groups to vote whilst prohibiting others. What I'm now going to put through is a series of acts. All of these acts have come into force. They are now part of law as of 2022. So they are now law. This isn't something that's proposed. This is something that is. You have the Elections Act 2022, where you have to have compulsory voter ID. Now, the thing with compulsory voter ID is nobody has national identity cards because they're not required under the Identity Cards Act 2006. So I took this article and it said this: a lack of eligible identification, more common in individuals who are disabled, unemployed, or without educational qualifications. The strange thing is they brought this act in, the Elections Act, with this criteria, when between 2015 and 2019, 153 million in-person votes are cast. There's only been 88 allegations of fraud, and between 2010 and 2018, only 2 allegations have been made out. So the question for me became, well, who does the act impact? Why do we need it? And the answer should be in the next slide. The act was criticised for permitting as acceptable voter identification an older person's bus pass, Oyster 60 Plus card, and a Freedom Pass, whilst not allowing 18 plus student Oyster cards, National Rail cards, or student IDs. House of Lords proposed an amendment, Tories rejected it. So why would they bring this sort of legislation in? And the answer is any regime that's in power will want to skim over its faults. It'll want to skim over the things that it's done wrong. The way it does it is by restraining certain groups from voting. It doesn't want young people to vote. That must be the only logical conclusion. What does it want to skim over? The fact that people are in a heat or eat situation. The increased inflation, the drop in the pound, the poor and incompetent negotiation skills with the EU, bad for business, generally as a party, no care for the basic payment scheme for farmers. As that's being eroded, nothing's been put in place to replace it, defunding the NHS, ambulance waiting times increasing, and partying at number 10 during COVID. If it wants to skim over this, it brings in things like this, the Elections Act, with these sorts of restrictions. Now, the next criteria was persecuting minorities. So under the National Borders Act 2022, they essentially want to take away citizenship without notice. And the Law Society, going since 1825, representing solicitors, says this: we have significant concerns that a number of the Act's measures are likely to be incompatible with international law, damage access to justice, and negatively impact the role of lawyers. Part of that Act, which wasn't brought into law, was that rescuing people, in particular refugees, drowning at sea, was going to be criminalised. Just think about that. Here you've got a government that says, if you're drowning at sea and someone rescues you, the person rescues you is going to be criminalised. It's only after pressure from the Royal National Lifeboat Institute and other charities that was changed. Now, I remember distinctly, and you'll all remember Alan Kurdi, that young Syrian boy, 2 years old, red top, blue shorts, all over the national newspapers. So what the Conservatives are saying, if you try and rescue somebody like that, you would be criminalised. Now, they didn't put that into law. That had to be changed, but that was one of the proposals. Going on with the theme of persecuting minorities and taking away their rights to exist, you've also got this new provision as well in the Police Crime and Sentencing Act 2022. Again, an act of law, which basically criminalises residing in a vehicle on someone's land without consent. It's a criminal offence. it essentially criminalises a nomadic way of life. So Conservatives, without finding a political solution to what is a social problem, what is their response? Prosecute, criminalise and lock people up for their culture and their way of life. The fifth point. When you protest, they want to silence you. They want to lock you up and even take away your right to vote. Under the same Act, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act 2022, the Home Secretary now has broad powers to make regulations without reference to Parliament. Just let that sink in. And decide on the type of protest deemed acceptable or unacceptable by the state. So essentially, if your protest is too noisy, or you're causing a bit of a nuisance, or is too disruptive or deemed to be too disruptive, then it's now criminalised. And what's the potential sentence for you? 10 years, up to 10 years in prison. I'm not saying this, the Act is. It's a staggering assault on the right to protest, on the right to assembly. It criminalises noisy protest. It hands out 10-year sentences. The Association of Police and Crime Commissioners registered their disagreement with this. Now, bearing in mind everything that I've said, they want to take away the right to legal challenge. The Judicial Review and Courts Act, and follow me on this. What does judicial review mean? It means where the courts can audit the legality of a decision being made by a public body in the UK. Now, Section 1 of the Act gives the courts discretion on how it makes quashing orders, and which can be made to strike down a decision or an instrument that is found to be unlawful. Now, it brought in two new types of quashing orders, a suspended quashing order and a prospective quashing order. What conference you need to know is that both these sorts of quashing orders allow acts to remain remain valid for a longer period of time. Therefore, things done by public bodies can remain lawful prior to that order being given. Judicial review is the system by which the court checks and balances the state. It's a vital safeguard which has now been abolished, in my view. What does that mean? What does that look like? Well, the Electoral Commission Abolition Bill. Now, this hasn't come into law. Now, this is the last bit I'm going to just put up here. But what does this do? This basically abolishes the Electoral Commission as we know it. The Electoral Commission, created in 2001, is an independent agency. It regulates party and election finance and sets the standard for how elections should be run. And the Conservatives want to put a minister in charge. What did the Election Commission say? It said this: in a strongly worded and highly unusual public letter, the Electoral Commission said provisions of the Elections Bill for ministers to draw up new strategy and policy statement, which the watchdog must take into account of, had no precedent in comparable democracies. That's the Election Commission saying this. So let me tie all of this up in a package for you. Just go with me on this, because the last bit's the unelected leaders. But imagine this. Imagine if you have an unelected leader who decides not to call a general election for whatever reason, just not happy with the timing. So the electoral minister, the electoral commission, the minister in charge says, yeah, that's fine. Don't have to call it. Just go with it. So somebody decides to judicially review that decision. And the court says, well, you know, it's wrong. There should be an election. But the fact that they haven't called one is not a problem. They should call one now. Then they make a different reason up and they don't call one. Go to court again and they don't call one. They're waiting for the timing to be right. So now there's protests. Now, all of you out there protesting, all of you. But somebody says your protest is too noisy and disruptive. So you all get locked up and now you're all in prison for up to 10 years. And what happens when you're in prison? Is it up there? Prisoners don't have the right to vote under Section 4 or the Representation of People Act 2006. If there was ever a way to create political prisoners in a modern democracy, then we're now seeing the framework for it. And this is my worry. So what's the hope? Well, the hope in my view is, the hope in my view is this. I think all of this has come in 2022. People haven't really woken up to what this is, is what I think, but hope is wisdom. Hope is knowledge that things are going to change. Knowing what hope means is truly what I think being a Lib Dem is really all about. Strong moral values, courage, fair and equal treatment, treating businesses equal with people, looking after your farmers, protecting nature and environment. But what can we do? When my son, who's 9 years old, he asks me in the future, says, well, what did you do to stop all of this happening? I said, well, I stood for Parliament, I stood as a councillor, I protested, I went out there, and I did my best. So what can we do? We can campaign, we can go out there and we can give the Tories a bloody nose at every single by-election and general election. I don't believe Labour is going to be supportive of civil liberties. The end of the Blair government showed us that, or the Labour government, and we know that those civil liberties have slowly been eroded to this point where we are now. So the last two questions I asked, I think, were there. Do you believe, as conference, that our civil liberties are there to lose or lost? Well, I think they're lost. And do you think we're living under the foot of an authoritarian regime? Not quite yet, but we're almost there. I hope that's not putting too much of a downer on things, but that is the that is the law as it stands, and that's a review of all the acts that I think are relevant to civil liberties in 2022. Thank you.